And warm and friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to have a nice two-part chat today with Eric Fawcett. He does an absolutely excellent job as a part of the Truly Donovan Network over at Burner Ball. He and Kevin Sweeney, the newest members of that, he does an absolutely excellent job taking a look at this game of college basketball, and he's also a coach on the international front as well. So I thought that this was a very valuable opportunity to talk about something that I haven't touched upon too much here in the offseason. I've been noting some of these guys that are international that are making the leap on forward to college basketball. I know that BYU has done a very good job of being able to bring in a few guys that are international. Obviously, St. Mary's, year in and year out, they've got that Australian pipeline, but we're going to be talking to Eric about how the level of international recruits, international transfers, is much higher now than ever before, how he evaluates some of these guys that are going to be coming in. He's going to mention a few off-the-radar guys as well, and just how to determine whether the, shall we say, foreign trip that your team took was against really good international competition or not so great international competition to have you feeling a little bit bullish/bearish coming into the season. Then in part number 2, we're going to talk a little bit more about the SEC, as Eric has spent a long time covering the Florida Gators over at Gator Country, so we're going to be diving in there. How the SEC has sort of been, for lack of a better term, a yo-yo sort of league in terms of the way that they utilize the transfer portal, and we're going to be hitting upon so many different things with him, including a few teams that he's bullish and bearish on as well. So we've got a great chat coming up with Eric, and if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, because Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, and if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we all fire those in, and please do send those in, because we are about 5 weeks away from the start of the college basketball season. We've only got 4 conference previews remaining, and I'll be doing probably 2 of those next week, so I do want to know what you want to hear on this podcast, so that way I can get you set for the upcoming season. So if you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_D1. Keep in mind, LarsCM, maybe does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Since we didn't get in any today, how about if we just dive into it with our good friend Eric, who he is the newest member of Burner Ball. He does a tremendous job as a coach himself, and we're going out north of the border for this one as well. So it truly is an international chat, as Eric is out there in the lovely country of Canada. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his first and last name, Eric Fawcett. That is a C on the end of Eric, and then last name is spelled Fawcett, and then there's an underscore after that. And Eric, it's a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It seems like the season is getting closer and closer, and it'll be here before we know it. So good time to talk basketball for sure.
Oh, it is a great time to be able to talk basketball, as, man, we are about 5 weeks away. Cannot wait. And first things first, I do want to ask you about this, because in terms of these rosters, a lot of the biggest unknowns are going to be with some of these international guys. And I know that over on your Twitter/X handle, you've done a great job of being able to highlight some of these guys. And just in your opinion, what has some of these international recruits/international transfers been able to do for the game of college basketball? And are there a few guys that you're pinpointing this year that could be real difference makers that are a little bit off the radar?
You know, I love that you asked me this. I think I am uniquely qualified as someone who works in, quote unquote, international basketball, working with a lot of teams in Europe and a lot of players that play in Europe, and really understanding the level these guys come from. I just think it is of utmost importance that people realize before we go into the season that we are seeing a caliber of European player that the college game has never seen. Again, let me just, give some backstory to that. When you look at the players that have come from Europe historically to college basketball, it is not the first tier of European talent. It's not the second tier of talent from Europe. It's really often not even the third tier, because the best players from Europe we're trying to get on the development rosters of teams like a Real Madrid, like a Barcelona, like an Alba Berlin. So all the best European players would stay at home. And it was really the guys that didn't, have a place to kind of sit that would be the ones that would come over to college basketball and try their luck there. So, just as a little bit of an example, Vladimir Ivicic at Kentucky was, a big story when he kind of, burst on the scene, had his big game. Obviously, it didn't go as well as hoped, but that was a guy that, kind of showed, look at this European player. player. Like, I don't think people realize that he was in the second division in the Baltic League, which is, a not very good league at all. And he couldn't get on the floor in the second division in a not very good league. So he said, "Oh, I'm going to go try out college basketball." And I don't say that to bring him down or diminish his resume, but I just want people to know that like that is the caliber of player that has historically come to the college game. And then when you look at the players that are coming this year, they are coming off first division Turkish teams. That is one of the best leagues in the world outside of the NBA. You're seeing guys that are coming that have experience with Real Madrid, with Barcelona, with their top development program, like some of the best development programs in Europe, like just like a caliber of guy that you wouldn't see. So I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that are listening, or, they see the European players of the past and they say, well, it's pretty hit or miss. I kind of need to see it. But the kind of European player that's coming to college basketball right now is just so far beyond what has happened in college basketball history that I truly think the biggest inefficiency in basketball, and people are going to see it very quickly, are these European players. So, there's one that I think is, of course, really good. You asked for some under the radar ones, so I won't go for the big names. I'll go for this kind of second tier. So like Urban Klavzar at Florida. That's a player who in 2021, as a 17-year-old, due to COVID, had to go play with the first team at Real Madrid and play against a CSKA Moscow team that had multiple former NBA players. And he was 17 years old and he had, double digit points and a couple assists as a 17-year-old, and then he went on last year to play second division Spain, which is, again, the top division in Spain is the best domestic league in the world outside the NBA. So he was in the second division and was playing with guys, against guys that were former high major players that are now 5 or 6 year pros. And he was playing with them. Like, again, so that's a guy that's just not even really being talked about. And his team in Spain would crush everyone in college basketball. I think that that's a name to look for. And then Samet, this is a tough one. Yedatoglu, who's at SMU. That was a player that, again, he played in the top division in Turkey. Again, legitimate minutes, and he's 7'1". Like, how does a guy like that not go to a team like SMU and contribute right away in a way that I think a lot of people are not expecting? So again, if you're one of the teams, Wichita State, another one that kind of picked up an under the radar, quote unquote European player that played in an incredible league in Europe, you can come back and pull this clip if I'm wrong. And of course, I'm not saying every single one of them is going to hit, but like overall, like this is the biggest injection of talent to college basketball that's really ever happened. And I don't think it's getting talked about enough. And I think it's because some of these, bad European players that couldn't cut it in Europe, so they tried out college basketball. Like, that's not the case anymore. These guys are getting pulled from the best situations in Europe because of NIL, pretty much exclusively. And yeah, like these guys are going to surprise people. They're going to be very good right away. And some of these guys are 20 or 21 years old that are being told that they're in their first year. Urban Klavzar at Florida has played 4 years as a professional and he's a freshman. You know what I mean? Like, this is like one of those things that these guys are going to be better than people think right away. But down the line, you are going to get like some of the best players in college basketball are going to be European. So I'm glad you asked. That was a lengthy response, but man, I tell you, these European players are good.
And I'm so glad that you were able to answer in that sort of just depth in general, because I think that there's a lot of people as well that they come in with the wrong expectations of their team based on what happens during the summertime as well. As Eric Fawcett, he does an amazing job over with Trilly Donovan over at the Burner Ball Discord. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops because, as we know, there's a lot of people that are trying to get a feel for their teams. They take a look at how they did in terms of their international trip, and there are some teams that lost a few games. There were some teams that ran completely roughshod, and just how hit or miss is it based on the competition that they're playing? Because I think a lot of people see a foreign trip and they think, oh, well, the teams that they played in Turkey are the same as the ones that they played in France, but I think that you laid it out very well. The level of competition that these teams are playing could be just completely night and day.
Yeah, and I would just, if you're someone who has a team or someone, in your league picked up a European player, like, and you're interested, like, I would encourage you, like, go to that team's, website, look at the other players on that team, because you might be like, that guy played with Stephon Moody. That was a all SEC player who's now played professionally for 5 or 6 years, or go and be like, oh, this guy played with Mindaugas Kuzminsis, like, who's, was a 4-year South Carolina player who's now, again, a 5 or 6 year pro playing at the same level as these guys that are 19, 20. Like, it doesn't have to be that difficult just to see the level, where, again, as opposed to, some previous European guys that haven't worked out, they wouldn't make it in some of the leagues these players are coming from. So yeah, that's also just an easy way. If you're curious at all, just, it's pretty simple. Go to the league the guys were competing at and look at some of the players in that league, and you're going to see guys that were excellent at the college level that are now professionals. And that's the level some of these European guys were playing at as 17, 18, 19-year-olds.
And then you were mentioning Florida a little bit before, and I know that you were working over at Gator Country for quite a while. So I feel like this is a good launching point for part number 2 of our conversation, as we're going to be rejoined by Eric, taking a look at the Florida Gators for this upcoming season. A couple of that, we're going to be diving in on just how the SEC has maneuvered this offseason in the transfer portal, how they've been going a little bit more defense-oriented, and then we're going to be taking a look at a few teams that he's bullish and bearish on for the upcoming season. So that's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be rejoined by Eric Fawcett. He is the newest member over at Trilly Donovan's Burner Ball. He and Kevin Sweeney doing a great job as player evaluators, and Eric is a coach himself on the international front, so it was great to have part 1 of our chat with him. Now let's dive in a little bit more on these college basketball teams, as Eric for the longest time was covering the Florida Gators over at Gator Country. So what are some of your expectations for Florida Bunch at last year? They were really good on the glass. You were mentioning it. They've done a great job bringing in a whole different bunch of guys, whether that be a few international guys. They've hit the transfer portal. They've got a few guys coming back. So they've got a really nice blend of just different guys in general. But how do you take a look at a bunch that I feel like the biggest knock on them was the defense from a season ago?
Yeah, you mentioned it. You look at their overall numbers and particularly their efficiency, and they were good when it comes to offensive efficiency. They were very poor when it came to defensive efficiency. And the thing was, when you kind of take a peek behind the hood and look at a lot of advanced numbers, and anyone who really watched Florida could also tell you this with the eye test, they weren't even necessarily a great offensive team, but they hammered the offensive glass, like you mentioned, which, helps your efficiency. But it was a lot of offense that was a little stagnant, wasn't really creating advantages. And then they'd throw it at the backboard and miss. And then they'd have 2 7-footers on the floor who'd get the rebound and finish. So their offense was propped up a little bit like that. But at the same time, points are points and efficiency is efficiency. And whether it takes you 1 shot or 3 shots on the offensive end to score, the points and the efficiency is the same. So you can kind of weigh that for yourself. But by any metric you want to use, they were just dreadful on the defensive end. And you could tell that the staff knew that that was the case, and that was really a priority to change things. Like Todd Golden, throughout his coaching career, he has been a defense first, second, and third guy. So I think it was killing him a little bit to have a team that was really, not competitive on the defensive end. So really you can look with their portal acquisitions, it was all defense. They get Elijah Martin, was obviously the biggest name of their portal class from Florida Atlantic. So a lot of people will know him from their success. And he was kind of that defensive dog on the perimeter. He can make some threes, which is great, but he's someone who's 6'2" and not a point guard, not someone who handles the ball very much. They're going to try to make him that, but we got a 4-year sample size of him not being particularly comfortable with the ball. That's something where it's like, that is a defense first acquisition. Then they got Sam Alexis from Chattanooga, 6'9", 230 pounds, great feet, moves laterally, block shots, not a lot of offensive game, very limited in that area. So you look at that and you say, okay, that is a defense first acquisition. And then the third name they brought in, Ruben Chinyelu from Washington State, someone who kind of struggled to get on the floor for Washington State, to be quite honest with you. And Florida staff is saying this is their starter for sure. So we'll see how that goes. The 4th big in Washington State's rotation going to start at Florida, a team that thinks they can make a second weekend. We'll see exactly how that goes. But that's a guy who, again, joined the sport of basketball a little bit late in his life. Unbelievable physical tools, reported 7'6" wingspan, but someone with just no offensive game. So again, you look at that one and you say, this is a defense first acquisition. So everyone Florida brought in through the portal was for defense. Well, Elijah Martin knocks down shots. So you could say he's got some offensive game there. Chinyelu and Sam Alexis are quite limited offensively. So you could tell that that Florida staff said, hey, we're looking at the portal class and we want defense, defense, defense. Where does that leave Florida for this year? They're certainly going to improve from a defensive standpoint. Their efficiency is going to get better. They did bring in some very good defensive pieces, these guys that I mentioned, but man, their offense is going to suffer. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that their offense was drastically overrated because of the impact of offensive rebounding. And hey, maybe they do that again in their top 10 offensive rebounding team and that'll prop things up. But really the story of Florida's season last year was their inability to win a big game. And a lot of that was because when it's, a tie game, a close game in the final couple of minutes, like you need to be able to score. You can't just defend your way to a win in the final 2 minutes of a close game against a really good opponent. You need to score. You need someone who can go and get a bucket. and they didn't really have that. Again, I still think that the offense is going to be a concern, which I know a lot of people are going to think is crazy given their numbers last year and the fact that they do return Walter Clayton, who is a very good offensive piece, but they are going to get back to a personality that the head coach and Todd Golden and his staff, who is largely defensive minded coaches, like this is a team that fits their personality a lot more. So I think they're going to see and I know this would be a massive jump. I believe they were 94th in the country in Ken Palm's defensive efficiency last year. I think they can be like top 15, which would be a massive leap, but they think they can do that. But the question is, where is that offense? That's going to be the story, particularly with these players that I mentioned they're bringing in.
And that leads me to this as well, because you mentioned all the changes that happened at Florida on the defensive front, as Eric Fawcett, who does great work looking at this great game of college basketball, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And do you feel like it was a little bit reactionary of many of these SEC teams to be able to do a better job on defense? Because I still remember 2 years ago, it was a case where nobody could knock down a three in the SEC. So last offseason, you saw a lot of SEC teams bring in a bunch of three-point shooters, but bringing in those three-point shooters led to a little bit of a drop-off on defense. And it feels like this offseason, because the offense was very much increased, but the defense was decreased, now teams are correcting and going for a lot more defense, it feels like, as well.
I love that you mentioned that. I mean, that's kind of how things have swung. It's, it goes to one end of the teeter-totter and the other rises, and then everyone rushes to the other side. And the pendulum's swinging pretty rapidly. And again, got to think, these coaches, a lot of them entered the profession when it was a development game. It was a recruiting and a development game. You brought in guys you thought you could mold, and you kind of molded them. And now it's professional basketball. It's 1 year deals. What have you done for me lately? And, I'm someone who works as an assistant coach at the professional level. So I kind of know what it's like to have to build teams year by year and not know exactly what's coming back. And I think that a lot of these coaches are just not used to that. That's not the industry that they signed up for. And it's not the one that they spent their lives kind of working towards. And you can tell that, quite frankly, a lot of good coaches are not very good general managers. And a lot of them could really, recruit high school kids and develop and kind of form those players into what they need to be. But when it comes to, free agency, I think that you're seeing, like you mentioned, just pendulum swinging so far to this end, pendulum swinging so far to the other end. And I think that they're getting, better at it. And this year, I do really like what a lot of teams did, kind of, without addressing their issues, without completely swinging to the other side of things. But yeah, I do think in the SEC, where we all know they've got the NIL money and, really a lot of these teams who could kind of go through the portal and handpick who they want. I think the teams are getting smarter, but I do think, this previous season and the one before that, I mean, I don't think these coaches in the SEC did a particularly good job of using their resources. And I joke about it, but again, this is a new situation for them to be essentially general managers of a professional basketball team on 1 year deals. And when you're not used to that, you see it with young general managers in Europe, in other pro leagues as well. Yeah, they're going to be reactionary, and pendulum's going to swing too far to the other direction. And I think things have normalized a little bit now.
Yeah, it is going to be so interesting to look at these teams, as there's so many new look teams this season. There's been so many changes that have been made. And Eric, that leads me into this as well, because I know that you're doing a great job breaking things down, getting things set for the upcoming season, just in terms of the way that you're evaluating things in comparison to what you've been perhaps seeing from others. Are there a few teams that are starting to jump out and you're starting to feel like you're a bit more bullish/bearish on them rather than others? And is there just a few teams that are a little bit either too hyped up in your opinion, or going a little bit too far under the radar that you are in on for the upcoming season?
I guess the one name that is this is not going to be, this is not too hot of a take. But, speaking about addressing issues, I look at Alabama, and I don't know why a lot of people aren't saying that this is their pick to win the national championship. And I think that, again, that's a team that we know their offense was extremely explosive. I mean, up until 3 weeks left in the season, they were about to set the record for the most potent offense in the Ken Palm era in terms of offensive efficiency. They really tailed off in the last couple of weeks. So I think they ended the second or third or something like that. And then, of course, they couldn't guard at all. And that was the big issue. Particularly, they were getting nothing from their fives. And I think that when you look at what they brought back, essentially everyone, of course, Mark Sears, who could be the player of the year in college basketball. And then they add Cliff Omarui to bring that defensive presence and also bring a lob presence offensively. I think that now, that is a team that did one thing extremely well with their offense. They're bringing all the same pieces back that are contributing to that. And they did a great job of covering up the holes. So I look at Alabama and like I really think that this could be the best team in college basketball. And I know that's not a, particularly hot take because, I think kind of consensus right now would be that they're, somewhere in the top 10. You could, everyone's rankings are different, but somewhere in that range. But like again, like, still when I see them at 8th or 9th or 7th in people's ratings, I'm like, to me, this is a top 2 or 3 team. And I think if I was filling out a poll myself, I think they'd be number 1. So I think that's just tremendous. And then when I look at a team that I think is maybe a little bit overrated, that I'm not, maybe feeling as much as other people, like to me, that's Texas, a team that actually did a little bit better than I thought last season, than I expected them to. But I look at the players they brought in and, Arthur Kaluma's been one of those guys ever since Creighton that it's like, oh, sneaky NBA upside, like just need him to make the next step. And like that next step is just really never came. And you're kind of left with a guy who's a 6'7", take advantage of mismatches guy. And again, rock solid player. Not sure he's a huge needle mover. And then they have Jordan Pope, who, put up good numbers. You talk to some people in that league and they're like, no one was too sad to see him gone. Seems like maybe that's an empty calories guy. And again, I think that Texas brought in some names, some people that, have numbers at the high major level. And that could be oftentimes a recipe for success. But yeah, I just wonder if there's a little bit of empty calories there to an extent. Yeah, that would be one team that I see, people being pretty universally high on. And I'm like, I think I'm going to have to see it with them.
Yep, and I think that that's such a good point on Jordan Pope as well, because he was over at Oregon State last season, and as we know, over at Oregon State, it was a rough bunch last season, so someone had to score points, and it always becomes one of those questions, was he scoring out of necessity and because someone had to get those points, or was he just truly a great player with just absolutely nothing around him? We shall see on that, but one thing that we do know for sure is that, Eric, you're doing an amazing job getting set for the upcoming college basketball season. I know that you're doing great work over there at Burner Ball with Trilly Donovan, all those guys, the 3-man weave, part of that great platform as well. And I know you're doing some coaching as well. So love the good people at home, know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
You mentioned the biggest thing for me is joining Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated to do a video-based show on the Burner Ball kind of Discord and website there. So we've already recorded the first, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but we've recorded the first 2 episodes already. I'm really happy with what we've done. It's 15-20 minute kind of video based content that is very X's and O's heavy. So I would say it is just the kind of, really in-depth basketball analysis that you're just really not getting anywhere else in the college basketball sphere right now. So I'm really thankful for Trilly for giving us this opportunity, which again, I know is such a strange sentence to say these days, but media's changing, and someone like Trilly Donovan who's really invested in having super in-depth college basketball analysis. So that'll be the biggest thing. And then, yeah, you can follow me at Eric Fawcett _ where I mostly post X's and O's videos and often from obscure European teams. But when we get back to college basketball, it'll be pretty college basketball heavy.
Love it, as Eric is a man that does a great job looking and going in depth on this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. And you just heard it, a wealth of information. So a big thanks, Eric, for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we will fire those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at Junet_D1. Keep in mind, LearnCM, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, all 366 days this year. Rain, shine, regular season, off season. We're about 5 weeks away from the start of the college basketball season. So please do let me know what you want to hear on this podcast with regards to those Twitter /X questions. And I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.